allow me to start the second session formally. PGRs from or focusing on the Global South, challenges and solutions. Great. So our next guest speaker is Isobel Webster. She is PhD candidate, School of Modern Languages, University of Leicester. Over to you, please.
Hello. I hope everyone can hear me okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. So, as Norman said, my name is Isobel Webster, and I work in the Modern Languages department, specifically in Latin American Studies. I started my PhD in January, but before that I did an MPhil. So I've been a PGR for a couple of years now, and yeah, whilst I have current experience of doing a PhD, I also have the benefit of hindsight looking back at my MPhil project. Personally, I really enjoy research. I find it a rewarding and fulfilling path. There are some challenges though, some of which I think are a great opportunity for us to grow, others of which are things that maybe could be mitigated to make our lives a little bit easier. So yeah, I'm going to kind of focus on three main challenges that I've identified today and talk through some possible solutions. So the first one I wanted to talk about was resources, sort of acquiring sources, primary and secondary. Certainly, when looking at certain sources, they can be really kind of difficult to get hold of in the UK, especially if they're kind of specific to certain countries. Like I said, I work in Latin American Studies, so yeah, lots of the sources might kind of be specific to Latin American countries. I remember a specific example of a film that I was really struggling to get hold of. I kind of looked online as my first port of call, but I couldn't get a hold of it. And in the end, I wound up working with the acquisitions team in the library, and they were able to acquire a VHS tape of the film, and I believe it was the only copy in the entirety of the UK, and I managed to get a VCR player in order to kind of watch this film. So I would say that in terms of kind of solutions for that, it's about, you know, institutions continuing to invest in libraries, and continuing to signpost that things like the acquisition team is a resource that that students can use to acquire kind of some more niche sources. I would also kind of add that acquiring resources can be pretty cost intensive. So another example is, like, at the moment I work in literature, and recently I was acquiring a book of poetry and wound up kind of shipping it in from Argentina, which obviously is a little more costly than if I were shipping something in from Britain. So whilst we have lots of kind of pots of money for extra training or supporting researchers who are going to conferences, who are travelling, I do feel that perhaps some investment in pots of funding pots for acquisition could be something interesting to consider. The second area I wanted to kind of talk about was some like difficult subject materials of our research. So at undergrad and on talk courses, there has been a lot of focus recently on projects around kind of sensitive or potentially triggering materials, but as researchers we can't always be pre-warned about whether the materials we encounter are going to be potentially quite triggering or heavy. So for me, for example, my last project looked a lot at death studies, and I found myself getting quite caught up in how heavy some of the materials were that I was dealing with. So I think that really kind of like extra training for PhD students around these heavy, difficult materials, sort of helping to give coping strategies, dealing with processing emotions around this, and looking at how students can work with supervisors around work that is maybe triggering or spending like extended periods of time looking at heavy, difficult subjects. And then the final point I wanted to raise was in terms of looking at, again, so kind of linked towards mental health. I would say that the majority, if not all, PhD students struggle with mental health at some point. I think personally one of the biggest challenges of the PhD is how strong a relationship you have to have with yourself. So for example, in a normal job, if you have a colleague that maybe you're not necessarily getting on with, at least you know that at the end of the day, they're not going to follow you home. Whereas in a PhD, you do follow yourself home. So I think, it can be, PhDs can be stressful, they can be quite draining, quite lonely. And I think that, definitely there's been an increase in conversations around protecting researcher mental health. But I think that maybe more could be done, more investment in counselling services, for example, because not everybody has the same support network at home. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.